They say the American dream is a brightly lit, paved highway, a straight shot to success. But for some, that road is a dark, winding path littered with broken glass and frozen nights. This is the story of a boy who walked that path, a boy named Elias Vance. Picture this, a young boy, swallowed by a summer jacket twice his size, standing alone in the middle of a brutal Ohio blizzard. He isn't just cold, he's carrying a hunger so deep it feels like a physical weight, a constant ache in his belly. Decades later, that same boy would hold the keys to a global tech empire. But the journey from that blizzard to the boardroom wasn't a fairy tale. It was a war. The struggle began long before he could even pronounce the word entrepreneurship. Elias's childhood wasn't filled with playgrounds and carefree afternoons. It was a blur of survival. His teenage years were a relentless cycle of 3 part-time jobs, each one chipping away at his youth. Imagine the exhaustion. He'd pump gas until midnight, the smell of gasoline clinging to his clothes, then rush home not to sleep, but to study. He'd sit under the pale yellow glow of a street lamp, poring over his SAT books, because the electricity at home was a luxury they couldn't afford. The darkness inside the house was a constant reminder of their poverty. This hardship was sharpened by a deeper wound. He often had flashbacks, vivid and painful, of the day his father left. It wasn't a dramatic, tearful goodbye. It was a quiet disappearance. His dad had promised to come back, promised toys and a better life. Instead, he left behind a mountain of debt and a broken woman, Elias's mother, who seemed to shrink a little more each day. That abandonment, that betrayal, didn't break Elias. It forged him. That trauma became the fuel for a fire that would burn brighter than any hardship. While his friends were at parties, worrying about prom dates and football games, Elias was at the public library. Not just doing homework, but teaching himself to code from dusty, outdated textbooks. He devoured information, piecing together the logic of programming languages, seeing a world of possibility in the lines of code. His goal wasn't just to be rich. It was something more primal. He wanted to be immune. Immune to the cruelty of a world that could leave a child shivering in a blizzard. Immune to the kind of pain that made his mother cry silently in the kitchen. He wanted to build a fortress of success so high that no one could ever hurt him or his family again. This wasn't a glamorous startup story you see in magazines. This was raw, gritty survival. He moved out on his own, living on $1 frozen meals that tasted like cardboard but kept him alive. His home was a damp, cold basement he rented for $100 a month, a space he also used as his office. The air was thick with the hum of old, second-hand servers he'd cobbled together. He slept on the floor, his pillow, a rolled-up sweatshirt, surrounded by the physical manifestation of his unyielding, almost terrifying ambition. There were nights he'd just stare at the ceiling, the doubt creeping in, whispering that he was chasing an impossible dream, that he was destined to fail just like his father. Just when the darkness threatened to swallow him whole, when every door seemed locked and every path was a dead end, a single piece of mail changed everything. It was an ordinary envelope, but inside was a miracle. A letter from an anonymous investor who had somehow stumbled upon Elias's early coding work online. It wasn't a contract or a business proposal, it was a check for $50,000, and with it, a simple handwritten note that read, "The world hasn't seen your full strength yet." Imagine that moment. After years of feeling invisible, of fighting in silence, someone saw him. Someone believed in him. It wasn't just the money. It was the validation. It was the ray of hope he so desperately needed. Proof that he wasn't just screaming into the void. With this newfound capital and a renewed sense of purpose, Elias didn't buy a fancy car or a nice apartment. He packed his meager belongings and headed west, to the heart of the tech world, Silicon Valley. He poured every single cent into a new venture, a bold idea to create an AI that could optimize sustainable energy grids. It was revolutionary, but it was also a massive gamble. The tech world is brutal, and for every success story, there are 1,000 failures. The suspense was a constant, gnawing pressure. He burned through the investment money faster than he expected. Development costs, server space, basic living expenses, it all added up. Soon, the $50,000 was gone. He was down to his last $50, a few crumpled bills in his pocket. His home was now his 1998 Corolla, the seats worn and the engine unreliable. His dream was hanging by a thread. The next day was his one and only shot, a presentation to a room full of powerful, skeptical venture capitalists. If it failed, that was it, game over. He wouldn't just be broke. He would be homeless, back on the streets, with nothing but the ghost of a dream. He spent the night in his car, parked in the shadow of the gleaming office building where his fate would be decided. He didn't sleep. He rehearsed his pitch over and over, his breath fogging up the cold windows. The next morning, he walked into that boardroom. He was wearing a suit he'd bought from a thrift store, and he probably looked out of place among the tailored Italian suits and expensive watches. But when he stood before the board of directors, something shifted. His voice, when he began to speak, wasn't trembling from fear. It was trembling with the raw, untamed power of his conviction. He wasn't just selling a product. He was sharing his soul. He laid out his vision, the years of struggle, the belief that his technology could genuinely change the world. The room was silent as he finished. Not a cough, not a shuffle of papers, just a heavy, thick silence. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. He could hear his own heart pounding in his ears. Then, the most cynical investor in the room, a man famous for crushing dreams before breakfast, slowly stood up. Elias braced for the rejection, the cold dismissal, but the man didn't speak. He started clapping. A slow, deliberate clap that echoed in the silent room. Then another board member joined in, and another, until the entire room was filled with applause. In that moment, the boy from the blizzard had finally conquered the storm. Elias Vance's story is more than just a biography of wealth. It's not just about going from rags to riches. It's a blueprint of human resilience. It teaches us something profound, that the scars we carry, the traumas that shape us, are not signs of weakness. They are maps. They show us where we've been, the battles we've survived, and they prove just how far we are capable of going. They are a testament to our strength. Today, Elias Vance sits in a corner office with a panoramic view of the San Francisco Bay. He's the head of a multi-billion-dollar company, but on his vast, polished desk, amidst the high-tech gadgets and important documents, sits a strange object, an old, torn, worn-out shoe. It's the shoe he was wearing that night in the Ohio blizzard. It's his constant reminder. A reminder of the boy who refused to freeze, the boy who refused to give up. A reminder that success isn't given, it's earned. This is the reality of the American dream. It doesn't come to those who simply wait or wish for it. It comes to those who are willing to fight for it, to bleed for it, and to walk through their own blizzard, no matter how cold it gets. Ever heard the saying, the bigger they are, the harder they fall? Well, today we're talking about a man who fell from the very top, only to rise again, stronger than ever. This is the incredible, untold story of Elias Vance, a name you might remember from the headlines a decade ago. We're talking a multi-billion-dollar giant in Silicon Valley, and Elias Vance was its king. He wasn't just some CEO in a suit. He was the genius coder who built the empire from scratch. The year is 2012. The world is just starting to breathe again after the financial crisis. But the tech world is a battlefield, and in this battle, cruelty often wears the mask of friendship. Enter Julian Elias's chief operating officer and a man he considered his closest friend. Elias had literally picked Julian up from bankruptcy, giving him a second chance, a seat at the table of power. But gratitude, it seems, has an expiration date. While Elias was busy innovating, Julian was busy plotting. In a brutal, calculated series of legal chess moves, Julian orchestrated a hostile takeover. Can you imagine? The board of directors, the very people Elias had made millionaires, turned their backs on him, blinded by corporate greed. He was kicked out of his own company, the company that was his baby, his life's work. Overnight, Elias went from a titan of industry to an outcast. He found himself in a tiny apartment in San Jose, his vast fortune frozen by endless lawsuits. He was watching the news, seeing Vance's stock price tank under Julian's clueless leadership. The irony was devastating. He was back where he started, but worse. He was eating at soup kitchens again, just like in his early days. But this time he was hiding his face under a hoodie, terrified of being recognized as the fallen genius from the magazine covers. This wasn't just about money, this was a spiritual crisis. Think about it. Everything you've built, everyone you trusted, gone. It would be so easy to give up, to let the bitterness consume you, to accept the world's verdict that you're finished. He had a choice to make. Stay a victim of his story or become the author of his comeback. And Elias Vance chose to fight. But he didn't fight with lawyers or press releases. He vanished. For 2 whole years, the world forgot about Elias Vance. The tech blogs wrote him off. A tragic flameout, they said. A cautionary tale. But in the shadows, a new fire was being kindled. Elias wasn't wallowing in despair. He was working. He was building something revolutionary, something that would not just compete with Vanstech but make it obsolete. He envisioned a decentralized energy grid, one that couldn't be controlled or corrupted by the same greedy corporations that had betrayed him. He wasn't alone. He secretly gathered a small, loyal crew of engineers. They called themselves the Outcasts. Each one was a brilliant mind who, like Elias, had been discarded by the ruthless tech industry for being too unconventional, too principled. They set up shop in a dingy garage. A cliché, I know, but this garage was powered by pure passion, endless cups of coffee, and a burning desire for redemption. They were building the future on a shoestring budget, while Julian was burning through Vanstech's cash on lavish parties and misguided projects. The suspense in Silicon Valley started to build. Whispers turned into rumors. A mysterious new startup was on the horizon, one that was poised to disrupt the entire energy sector. No one knew who was behind it, but the tremors were being felt. Meanwhile, Julian, oblivious and arrogant, was preparing for Vanstech's biggest product launch ever. He was about to unveil a new AI-driven grid at a massive tech conference in San Francisco, a project he believed would solidify his legacy. He had no idea he was walking into a trap set years in advance. The day of reckoning arrived. The conference hall was packed. The world's media was there, cameras flashing. Julian stood on stage, a smug smile on his face, boasting about Vance Tech is incremental, profit-driven innovation. He was at the peak of his speech when suddenly, the massive screens behind him flickered. The lights in the auditorium didn't go out, but something shifted. A new energy source quietly took over the entire venue. Then, from the side of the stage, a figure emerged. It was Elias Vance. He wasn't filled with rage or shouting accusations. He walked with a calm, stoic presence that commanded the entire room's attention. He didn't even look at Julian. He simply turned to the audience, and with a few clicks on a simple interface, he demonstrated his creation. He showed how his new system was providing free, clean, sustainable energy not just to the conference hall, but to entire rural communities that corporate giants like Vance Tech had always ignored. He wasn't just launching a product, he was launching a movement. The silent bomb had detonated. Vance Tech's multi-billion-dollar technology was made obsolete in an instant, not by a competitor, but by a better idea, a better vision for the future. The story of Elias Vance is more than just a revenge saga. It's a powerful reminder of what the American dream is really about. It's not a finish line you cross once, it's about resilience. It's about how many times you're willing to get knocked down and restart the race. His journey teaches us that while betrayal and cruelty are real, hope and determination are choices. They are the parts of you that no one can ever take away. You get to decide if you're the victim of your past or the hero of your future. In his late 50s, Elias Vance wasn't just a name. He was an institution, the sovereign of Silicon. But behind the towering walls of his high-tech mansion in Palo Alto, a different story unfolded. Immense power had brought with it a crushing silence. His wealth had built a fortress, not just against poverty, but against the very thing he craved most: human connection. For decades, he had fought corporate wars and built digital empires. But at night, the only sound was the echo of his own footsteps on cold marble floors, a lonely rhythm that reminded him of the heartbreak he had long buried. He'd often stand by his massive glass windows, gazing at the glittering city lights below, feeling a profound and hollow void. Success had given him everything he thought he wanted, but it had stripped him of the simple joy of being just Elias. The world's cruelty had forged him into a warrior, but in doing so, it had locked the innocent boy from Ohio away in a vault of steel and silicon. One night, in a moment of raw vulnerability, a memory broke through. It was a flashback to a simple day in the 1970s. He saw his mother, her hands worn but her eyes full of love, giving him a single apple for lunch. "Elias," she had said, "remember that an apple contains the seeds of a whole forest." The memory hit him with the force of a tidal wave. He suddenly understood. His entire life's struggle, the empires he built, the battles he won, that was the forest. But his mother, her love, her sacrifice, she was the seed. This revelation sparked a decision that would shock the world. He decided to confront his past, not with vengeance, but with compassion. He used his vast resources to track down the descendants of the very landlord who had thrown him and his mother out into the bitter snow all those years ago. He found the landlord's grandson, a man living in poverty, trapped in the grips of addiction. But instead of showing indifference, Elias reached out. He saw not the ghost of an old enemy, but another human being in pain. He offered help, a path to recovery, a chance to plant new seeds. Elias Vance passed away peacefully on a snowy December night, the weather mirroring the cold, desolate evening of his childhood eviction. But this time, he wasn't cold, and he wasn't alone. Outside his estate, thousands of people gathered in a silent candlelight vigil. They weren't there for the billionaire, the titan of industry. They were there for the man who understood their struggle, who had turned his own pain into a global mission of hope. What some had once dismissed as his boring history was now taught in schools as a curriculum of resilience. The 250,000 words written about him in biographies no longer focused on stock prices or AI algorithms. They spoke of a boy who survived a blizzard and somehow, miraculously, turned the biting cold into a source of enduring light. Death is usually a full stop, an end to the story. But for Elias Vance, it was merely a semicolon. While the world mourned the loss of the sovereign of Silicon, a secret countdown began. Deep within a high-security server room in Zurich, a digital legacy was about to be unleashed. A final move designed to expose the darkest secrets of the corporate world he once ruled. The moment Elias was laid to rest, the vultures descended. The board of directors of his former companies, flanked by high-profile investors, moved swiftly to dismantle his charitable foundations. Their primary target was his Energy for All initiative, a project designed to provide free, clean power to underserved communities. They saw an opportunity to turn this gift into a high-priced luxury, to privatize hope and sell it back to the desperate. The raw, ugly face of corporate greed was on full display. The air grew thick with suspense. It seemed his life's work would be undone in a matter of weeks. But then, a new player entered the game. A young, unknown lawyer named Sarah stepped forward. She had grown up in the same underfunded foster care system that Elias had once quietly supported. In her hand, she held a small, black, encrypted drive. Elias, the master strategist, had anticipated this betrayal. He knew the people who smiled at his funeral were the same ones who would rob his grave. He had spent his final years meticulously building a ghost protocol, a complex web of legal and technological traps designed to catch the corrupt. This drive was the key. The legal battle that followed was grueling. A true David versus Goliath story. For 2 long years, Sarah and her small, dedicated team fought against the most powerful and expensive law firms in America. They lived on stale coffee and an unshakable belief that Elias' vision was worth more than all the gold in the world. There were moments of pure heartbreak, times when it seemed certain they would lose everything. The media, controlled by the very elites they were fighting, launched a smear campaign, painting Elias as a delusional mad scientist and Sarah as a publicity-seeking opportunist. The pressure was immense. But every time Sarah felt the weight of despair, every time she felt like giving up, she would look at the photos Elias had left for her. They were photos of children in remote villages in Africa and forgotten towns in rural America, their faces illuminated by the glow of a tablet, studying at night thanks to his technology. The emotion captured in those images, the pure, unadulterated hope that was their fuel. It was a powerful reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't about money or power. It was about protecting a legacy of human decency. Ultimately, Elias's final victory wasn't the imprisonment of his enemies, though some did face justice. His true victory was the liberation of his technology. The Ghost Protocol didn't just expose the greed, it unlocked the patents. Today, his revolutionary decentralized energy system is open source, available to anyone, anywhere. Thousands of engineers and innovators across the globe are constantly improving and adapting it, a living, breathing testament to his genius. This was his ultimate ray of hope. The impact has been transformative. Here in the United States, his foundation has helped turn the Rust Belt from a symbol of industrial decay into a vibrant hub of green innovation, creating new jobs and new futures. And academically, his life story is now a case study at Harvard Business School. But it's not taught as a lesson in aggressive marketing or ruthless acquisition. It's taught as a lesson in something called conscious capitalism. Elias Vance proved that you can be fiercely competitive, incredibly hardworking, and wildly successful, and still keep your soul intact. He showed the world that the greatest empires are not built of silicon and steel, but of compassion and resilience. His story reminds us that our past doesn't have to define our future, and that even from the coldest, darkest nights, a light can emerge that illuminates the entire world. Elias Vance was dead. The world mourned the tech visionary, the man who reshaped our modern lives. And then, as it always does, the world moved on. But for one person, the story was just beginning. Her name was Sarah. She wasn't a tech genius or a corporate titan. She was just the granddaughter of the landlord who had once evicted Elias and his family, a family he later saved from ruin. In a strange twist of fate, Elias had named her the executor of his personal legacy vault. What appeared on the screen was far more unsettling. It was a folder containing a series of video logs. The title of the folder read, "The Price of the Dream." A chill ran down her spine. She clicked the first file. The image flickered to life, revealing Elias Vance, but not the confident, smiling figure the world knew. This was a younger Elias, maybe 40 years ago, sitting in a dimly lit room, his face etched with an exhaustion that seemed to seep through the screen. His voice, raspy and low, filled the silence. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means I'm gone. And it means I've trusted you with the truth. Everyone thinks my success was built on genius and hard work. They're not wrong, but it was also built on a secret. A burden I've carried for 40 years. Before Sarah could even process this, the world outside began to close in. With Elias gone, the vultures descended. Rival tech CEOs and the corrupt politicians in their pockets. People Elias had held at bay for decades saw their chance. They swarmed, launching a full-scale assault on his foundation, arguing his patents, the very bedrock of his life's work, should be seized and made public property. Then came the offer, a quiet meeting with a representative from a massive oil conglomerate. They wanted to buy his decentralized energy grid patent. The price, enough money to make her and her family comfortable for generations. All she had to do was betray Elias's vision of clean, free energy for all. The fight was no longer about money or patents. It was a battle for her own soul. Overwhelmed and on the verge of breaking, Sarah turned back to the videos. She needed to understand. She needed to know who she was fighting for. She clicked on a log titled The Crossroads. Elias appeared on screen again, looking even younger this time, gaunt and desperate. He spoke of a night back in the late 90s, a night he almost gave up. He was broke, starving, and on the verge of being evicted again. A military contractor had made him an offer, a chance to sell his technology, to weaponize his dream for a quick payday. I was ready to do it, Elias confessed, his voice cracking. I was tired of being hungry. I was tired of failing. He paused, looking away from the camera as if reliving the moment. But then I remembered my mother's words. She told me once, Elias, if you sell your soul for bread, you will never be full. That night, I chose to go hungry. I turned them down. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. In that moment, everything shifted. She finally understood. The boring history biographers wrote about, the decades of quiet, relentless work, weren't boring at all. They were a testament to his strength. Each day wasn't just another day in the lab. It was another invisible victory over temptation, another battle won against the forces that wanted to corrupt his dream. He hadn't just built a company, he had built a fortress of integrity. Brick by painful brick. Armed with this newfound strength, Sarah delved deeper into the drive. She discovered Elias's final, secret project. It wasn't a new gadget or a piece of software. It was a file named the empathy algorithm. But it wasn't a computer program. It was a sociological framework, a meticulously detailed blueprint for a new kind of society. It was a plan for universal basic income, funded entirely by a global network of automated green energy. Elias had spent his last years not chasing profits, but calculating, modeling, and proving how to eradicate global poverty without creating dependency. He had built a data-backed roadmap to a better world. It wasn't a dream, it was a plan. This was the legacy the vultures were trying to dismantle. Not just patents, but the hope for a future free from the greed that had nearly consumed Elias himself. Sarah now knew what she had to do. The fight wasn't just about defending a man's name. It was about defending the future of humanity. The climax was not in a courtroom. It was live, for the entire world to see. Using the evidence from Elias's secret logs, the recorded conversations, the threats, the bribery attempts he had silently documented for 40 years, Sarah orchestrated a global live-streamed event. She didn't just present a legal argument. She told a story. She showed the world the real Elias Vance, the hungry boy from Ohio, the man who chose integrity over comfort. And then, she exposed them. One by one, she laid bare the corruption of the rival CEOs and politicians, using their own words against them, all recorded by the man they thought they had finally defeated. The world watched, captivated, as the carefully constructed empires of the world's most powerful elites crumbled under the weight of one man's truth. Innocence, it turned out, had a voice after all, and it was deafening. Sarah finally understood why Elias had chosen her. Not just as an executor, but as a successor. The granddaughter of the man who had wronged him. He chose her to prove that the cycle of hate could be broken, that redemption was possible, that a single act of trust could ripple across generations. The life of Elias Vance wasn't a straight line from poverty to riches. It was a spiral, a journey that touched the depths of despair and the heights of human potential. He proved that a boring history of quiet consistency, of enduring pain, and of unshakable integrity is infinitely more powerful than the fleeting glamour of fame. A week later, Sarah stood before Elias's simple grave. The media was gone. The world was moving on again, but this time, things were different. His foundation was secure. His final project, the empathy algorithm, was in the hands of people who would see it through. Sarah didn't leave flowers. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, rusted key. It was the key to the apartment his family had been evicted from all those years ago. She placed it gently on the earth above him. The circle was complete. The boy who started with nothing had given everything to a world that had once wanted to give him nothing in return. And so, a new, insidious kind of conflict emerged. Let's call it cruel behavior 2.0. In the heat of this digital conflict, Sarah had a profound realization. She finally understood something her mentor, Elias, had known all along. The world doesn't change just because you ask it to, or because you prove you're right. It changes because you make the old ways obsolete. You don't fight the old system. You build a new one that's so much better, so much more efficient and humane, that the old one simply fades away. She wasn't just defending the grid. She was proving its resilience and its superiority. And prove it, she did. By the year 2040, the results were undeniable. The Vance effect, as it came to be known, had slashed global carbon emissions by a staggering 60%. Even more astonishingly, it had nearly eliminated extreme poverty within the United States. This isn't just some boring history lesson filled with dry statistics. This was a lived reality. Think about the Rust Belt, a region once defined by abandoned factories and economic despair. It was now reborn as the Green Belt. The Made in America label was back, but this time it had a soul. It stood for innovation, sustainability, and a commitment to human dignity. Meanwhile, the story of Elias, the visionary who started it all, became legendary. His life and philosophy became a case study at Harvard Business School. But the story doesn't end there. It concludes with a cliffhanger that left the entire world holding its breath. Before his passing, Elias had left Sarah a final message, a hidden set of coordinates. Following them, she embarked on a journey that led her to a remote, undisclosed location in the Appalachian Mountains. What she found there was beyond anything she could have imagined. It was a vault, but not for gold or money. It was a seed vault, but it didn't contain the seeds of plants. This vault was an offline, indestructible archive of human knowledge. It held everything humanity had ever learned: our science, our art, our history, our philosophies. It was a failsafe designed to protect future generations from the possibility of another dark age, ensuring that the light of knowledge would never be extinguished. And in the very center of this breathtaking vault stood a statue. It was a simple, elegant sculpture of a woman holding a small boy's hand, their gazes fixed on a distant horizon. Etched into the base was a simple, powerful inscription that captured the entire spirit of their journey. It read, "To the mothers who starve so their children can dream." This wasn't just a conclusion, it was the ultimate ray of hope. It was a testament to the idea that the greatest struggles are undertaken not for ourselves, but for those who will come after us. It was a promise that even in the darkest of times, humanity's legacy of knowledge, empathy, and hope would endure. The world had never known such peace. After the Vance grid went global, prosperity bloomed in every corner of the earth. But history has a funny way of repeating itself, not as farce, but as a more sophisticated kind of struggle. By the 2050s, a new breed of technocrats had risen through the ranks. They were sleek, efficient, and saw Elias Vance's core empathy algorithm as an archaic relic, a drag on maximum productivity. They had a name for it: the ghost in the machine. To them, it was nothing more than a moral compass, slowing down the relentless march of progress. Sarah, now a revered elder in the tech community, watched this unfold with a heavy heart. The attacks on Elias's legacy were subtle, a form of cruelty far more insidious than the physical eviction she had witnessed decades ago. This wasn't about throwing someone out into the cold, it was about the digital erasure of a man's soul. The board members of the Global Energy Council, the very body built on the foundation of the Vance grid, began a quiet campaign to rewrite history. They commissioned biographies, funded documentaries, all painting Elias not as the compassionate visionary who saved the world, but as a lucky opportunist who simply stumbled upon the right code at the right time. It was heartbreaking. To see the man who had sacrificed everything, who had poured his very essence into his creation, being systematically reduced to a footnote was a pain sharper than any physical blow. These were people who had never known the sting of a winter without a coat, who had never felt the gnawing emptiness of a hungry stomach. They were the children of the prosperity Elias had created, and now they were trying to disown their father. They saw his empathy not as a strength, but as a bug to be patched. The corporate war intensified. Memos circulated, algorithms were optimized, and the core principles of the Vance grid were slowly being chipped away. It was a silent coup, fought in lines of code and boardroom meetings. Sarah knew she had to do something. She couldn't let them dismantle the very thing that made the grid more than just a power source. It was a testament to humanity's better angels. Late one night, fueled by a mixture of anger and desperation, Sarah dug deep into the grid's source code, deeper than anyone had ever gone before. She bypassed modern security layers, using backdoors only she and Elias knew existed. And there, at the very core, nestled within the foundational architecture, she found it, a final, heavily encrypted file. It was a digital time capsule, untouched for over half a century. As she decrypted the file, a cascade of raw data flooded her screen. But it wasn't just data. It was a memory. The system triggered a full sensory flashback, pulling her into a moment from 19. It was a night Elias had never spoken of, a secret he had carried to his grave. She found herself in a freezing, damp basement. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and cold solder. Elias, so much younger, was huddled over a crude computer setup, his fingers blue and almost too numb to type. A crumpled letter lay on the desk beside him. It was a doctor's report. His mother's condition was terminal. The local energy company had cut their power again, and the cold was making her final days unbearable. In that moment of absolute despair, surrounded by darkness and the weight of imminent loss, Elias had done something extraordinary. He had just compiled his first truly successful program, a precursor to the grid, and into its heart, he had woven a failsafe. It wasn't a destructive virus or a backdoor for control. He called it the humanity trigger. It was a simple, yet profound piece of code designed to activate only if the system it governed was ever used for pure, unadulterated greed, completely ignoring the collective good. Sarah watched as the young Elias, overwhelmed by grief and a sense of profound injustice, broke down. He wept over his keyboard, his tears falling onto the exposed motherboard. A small spark, a faint sizzle, and a section of the board short-circuited. He didn't fix it. In that moment of searing emotion, he had a revelation. Technology without a soul, without empathy, is just another instrument of tyranny. That small, tear-stained flaw became a part of the machine's DNA. It was the ghost. It was his mother's memory. It was the system's conscience. The flashback ended, leaving Sarah back in her sterile, modern office, the weight of her discovery settling upon her. She now held the key. The technocrats had no idea what they were about to unleash. The climax arrived during the Global Energy Council's annual summit. The chairman, a man whose entire career was built on the grid's stability, stood at a grand podium, ready to announce the final optimization, the complete removal of the empathy algorithm. He called it Phase 2, Unlocking True Potential. As he gave the command to execute the override, the tension in the room was palpable. Then, everything went dark. Not just in the summit hall. Every screen in every city, from the towering billboards of New York's Times Square to the holographic ads in Tokyo's Shibuya crossing, flickered and died. The relentless hum of the digital world fell silent. A collective, global gasp. For a few seconds, the world held its breath, suspended in an unnerving quiet. And then, the screens lit up again. But they weren't showing stock market tickers or corporate logos. Something heart-touching and profoundly human appeared. The screens displayed a mosaic of faces. Millions of them. The face of a mother in a remote village, seeing her child read under an electric light for the first time. The face of a teacher in an underfunded school, now with access to the world's knowledge. The face of a factory worker, no longer breathing in toxic fumes. These were the people Elias had saved, the lives he had touched. Then, a voice filled the silence. It was Elias's voice, captured on an old recording decades ago, raw and full of emotion. He wasn't giving a speech about profit margins or market share. He was telling a story, a simple story about his mother, about how she once sold her favorite summer jacket to buy him an apple when he was hungry. It was a story about sacrifice, about love, about the simple dignities that greed so often tramples. The suspense that had gripped the world didn't shatter with a bang, but with a quiet, collective realization. The council members stared, stunned. The technocrats looked on in disbelief. The system they thought they could control was fighting back. It wasn't just a power grid. It was a mirror, and it was forcing the world to look at its own conscience. The humanity trigger had been pulled. That day marked the true beginning of the Vance century. It was no longer just about energy. It was about ethos. The event forced a monumental shift in the global economy, particularly in places like America. The focus pivoted from relentless consumption to meaningful contribution. The metrics of success changed. It wasn't about how much you owned, but about how much you gave back. The results were not just philosophical. They were real and measurable. Statistics from the following decades showed a staggering 40% drop in mental health crises. When people felt their work had purpose, when communities were valued over corporations, despair began to recede. Community-led innovation skyrocketed by 200%. People were not just passive consumers anymore. They were active creators, solving local problems with the tools the grid provided. This was the realistic, tangible outcome of a world that chose to prioritize human dignity over abstract digital growth. Imagine a world at peace, a utopia built by one man, Elias Vance. For nearly a century, humanity lived under the calm of the Vance century, a golden age of stability and progress. We all knew the story of its architect, a boy genius who rose from obscurity, driven by the mysterious disappearance of his father. The official story was that his father, a brilliant scientist, vanished while working on a classified project. A tragic accident, they said. A sacrifice for the greater good. But what if the foundation of this perfect world was built on a perfect lie? The truth, as it often does, began to unravel in the most unassuming of places. A dusty archive in a forgotten psychiatric hospital in rural Pennsylvania. A young researcher, sifting through decades-old files, stumbled upon a record from the late 19th. The patient had no name, only a number. He was a ghost in the system, a man erased from history. But tucked away with his meager belongings was a single photograph, its edges yellowed and soft with age. It showed a young boy with a bright, hopeful smile, standing beside his mother. The researcher's blood ran cold. The boy in the picture was unmistakably a young Elias Vance. The world watched, breathless. As the story unfolded, Elias Vance's father hadn't disappeared. He hadn't died in an accident. He had been silenced, framed by the very corporation he was about to expose for its dangerous and unethical experiments. He was declared mentally unstable and locked away, his identity stripped, his voice stolen. The man who tried to save the world was branded a madman and left to rot, forgotten by everyone except the son, who never stopped searching. This was the bombshell that shattered the pristine image of the Vance century. The hero we all admired was the son of a man who had been unjustly imprisoned. But the real gut punch, the truly heartbreaking twist in this saga, was yet to come. The archives revealed something else, something devastating. Elias, with his immense power and resources, had found him. Years before, the world knew, back in the early 2000s, when his influence was at its absolute peak, Elias found his father. He walked into that sterile, quiet room, a son ready to rescue the father he had idolized his entire life. But the reunion he had dreamed of was not to be. The man, sitting in the chair, was a hollow shell. Alzheimer's had ravaged his mind, erasing decades of memories, including the face of his own son. His father looked right through him, a stranger in his own life. Imagine the crushing weight of that moment. You spend your life building an empire, becoming the most powerful man on earth, all fueled by the hope of one day finding your lost father. And when you finally do, he doesn't know who you are. The man who was your entire reason for being sees you as just another face in a crowd of ghosts. Elias, the man who could reshape continents, was powerless against the disease that had stolen his father from him a second time. Thanks to the incredible technology of the Vance era, we've been able to access fragments of Elias's own digital consciousness, his recorded memories. And within that digital archive, we found it, a flashback to his final visit. The scene is heart-wrenching. Elias sits by his father's bedside, the silence heavy with unspoken words and lost time. His father is frail, his gaze distant and unfocused, lost in the fog of his deteriorating mind. Elias holds his hand, a silent vigil for a relationship that was stolen from them both. He knows it's the last time. He knows this is goodbye. He stands up to leave, the weight of a lifetime of sorrow on his shoulders. But then, it happens. A miracle. For just a few fleeting seconds, the clouds in his father's mind part. The vacant stare is gone, replaced by a flicker of recognition, of clarity. He looks at Elias, truly looks at him. And in a voice barely above a whisper, raspy from disuse, he says 5 simple words. I knew you'd come back for the apple. Elias, an apple. It sounds so random, so nonsensical. But to Elias, it was everything. It was a reference to a childhood memory, a secret shared between a father and son, a day in an apple orchard, just the two of them, a promise made and a secret kept. In that single lucid moment, his father wasn't just remembering an apple. He was remembering love. He was remembering his son. He was telling Elias, I see you. I remember you. I love you. It was the validation Elias had unknowingly spent his entire life fighting for. A single ray of hope that proved that even in the deepest, darkest abyss of a broken mind, a father's love for his son was an unbreakable code. That love had survived decades of imprisonment, illness, and silence. That 5-second miracle reshaped everything we thought we knew about Elias Vance. It explained the quiet melancholy that always seemed to linger behind his eyes, even at his moments of greatest triumph. It explained the relentless drive to create a better, safer world, a world where no family would ever have to suffer the way his did. He wasn't just building a utopia. He was building a monument to his father, a testament to a love that transcended even death and madness. But this story has one final, astonishing twist, a turn of fate, so perfect it feels like poetry. A final act of cosmic karma. Remember the forgotten psychiatric hospital. The records showed that for all those lonely years, Elias's father had been cared for by one dedicated nurse. She was the one who held his hand when he was scared, the one who talked to him even when he couldn't reply, the one who treated him with kindness and dignity when the world had thrown him away. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered her identity. And who was she? She was the daughter of the very corporate lawyer who had framed Elias' father all those years ago. Her father, consumed by guilt, had confessed his sins to her on his deathbed. Horrified by what he had done, she dedicated her life to atoning for his crime in the only way she knew how. She sought out the man her father had wronged and spent the rest of her career caring for him, unknowingly becoming a guardian angel to the father of the most powerful man in the world. In the end, it was an act of quiet, personal redemption that closed the circle. The daughter of the man who caused so much pain spent her life trying to heal it. Innocence found a way to bridge a chasm of hatred and betrayal. The story of Elias Vance isn't just about power, technology, or building a perfect world. It's a story about the enduring power of love, the quiet strength of forgiveness, and the incredible ways the universe finds to balance the scales. It reminds us that even in the face of unimaginable tragedy, hope can be found in the most unexpected places, and a father's love is a light that can never truly be extinguished. Thank you so much for watching. This story is a powerful reminder of the complex bonds that connect us all. If you found this as moving as I did, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more deep dives into the hidden histories that shape our world. Imagine a world, not too far from now, maybe the turn of the 22nd century, a world that's perfected efficiency, poverty. That's just a word you'd find in old digital history books. Hunger, a concept so alien it might as well be from another planet. Behind it all, the Vance grid hums, a silent, global network providing limitless, clean energy. It's the backbone of a perfect society, a utopia built by the genius of one man, Elias Vance. But here's the twist. What happens when life gets too easy? When every need is met before you even feel it? A dangerous side effect started to creep into this perfect world. The spirit of hard work, the very drive that built this paradise, began to fade. People forgot what it meant to struggle, to strive, to overcome. They were comfortable, but they were also becoming soft. A new global elite emerged, calling themselves the architects. They were the managers of this utopia, obsessed with data and efficiency. And in their cold, calculated view, Elias Vance's greatest achievement wasn't the energy grid, but his empathy algorithm that was woven into it. This algorithm measured and responded to human emotion, ensuring resources went where they were most needed, not just physically, but emotionally. The architects saw this differently. To them, emotion was a messy, inefficient variable. It couldn't be quantified perfectly, couldn't be controlled. They argued that in a society that had already solved all its problems, empathy was redundant, a relic of a bygone imperfect era. They decided it was time to upgrade the system by removing the human element completely. This was a new kind of cruelty, not the overt, physical kind from history, like a cruel landlord or a brutal dictator. This was a silent, intellectual erasure. The cold, logical decision that the memory of human struggle, of pain, of sacrifice, was no longer necessary. It was the ultimate act of disconnection, a decision to sever the soul from the system. The suspense was palpable, at least for the few who understood what was happening. The architects were preparing to launch Project Absolute. Their plan was to completely decouple the human spirit from the global energy network, to turn the Vance grid into a purely logical machine, governed by algorithms, not by the messy, unpredictable heart of humanity. They believed this would be the final step toward true perfection. Little did they know, they were about to unplug the very thing that kept their world alive. Meanwhile, far from the gleaming towers of the New World, in the overgrown ruins of what was once Silicon Valley, a young historian named Leo was on a quest. He didn't just study history, he searched for it, for tangible pieces of the past that the digital world had forgotten. He believed that to understand the perfect present, you had to touch the imperfect past. One day, sifting through the debris of an old data center, he found something impossible, something that shouldn't exist in a world where everything was digital and ephemeral. It was a physical artifact, a worn leather-bound ledger. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was clear. And as Leo carefully opened it, his heart stopped. The ledger belonged to Elias Vance himself, and the last entry was dated just days before his death. As Leo read, a story unfolded that the official histories had never told. This wasn't the triumphant journal of a genius celebrating his creation. It was the heartbreaking, private confession of a man who saw the future with terrifying clarity. Elias Vance had foreseen this very day. He knew that the comfort he was creating could become a cage. He understood that humanity, freed from all hardship, might forget the very struggle that made them human. One line, scrawled with a desperate energy, sent a shiver down Leo's spine. Elias wrote, "I have built a world of light, but I fear the darkness that comes when people forget how it feels to be cold." Leo's mind raced. He looked at the humming city in the distance, a world without cold, without hunger, without pain, and he finally understood. The Vance grid wasn't just a power network. Elias hadn't just built an energy solution. He had built a time capsule of pain, of empathy, of the very essence of the human experience. The empathy algorithm wasn't a feature. It was the entire point. It was a lock, and Elias had hidden the key in plain sight, within the collective memory of humanity's past struggles. The day of Project Absolute arrived. The architects gathered in their sterile control room, ready to flick the switch and liberate their society from the burden of emotion. The countdown began. The decoupling process initiated. And then, something unexpected happened. Across the globe, every screen, every device, every interface connected to the Vance grid went dark. A single message appeared, not in the crisp, clean font of the new world, but in a script that mimicked old-fashioned handwriting. It wasn't an error message. It wasn't a warning of a system crash. It was a request. Physical key required. The architects were baffled. A physical key. In a completely digital world, their system analysts scrambled, but the code was unlike anything they had ever seen. It wasn't a software lock. It was a biological one. The system, Elias Vance's system, was demanding a specific biological signature, a brainwave frequency that could only be generated by a human mind in a very specific state. The grid was demanding the brainwaves of someone experiencing genuine, selfless sacrifice. In their control room, the elite looked at each other in confusion. Then, in dawning horror, these were people who had never known hardship. They had never missed a meal, never felt the cold, never given up something they treasured for the sake of another. They had orchestrated a world without sacrifice, and in doing so, had made themselves incapable of producing the one thing the system now required to survive. They were trapped by their own perfection. This was the ultimate karma. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as Elias Vance had intended. It was a failsafe, a split check. It was designed to fail the very moment it fell into the hands of those who lacked a soul, those who had forgotten the cost of the light. The realization hit the world like a thunderbolt. The message spread from person to person, a story passed down from the past to save the future. You cannot rule a world of light if you have never understood the dark. You cannot appreciate warmth if you've never known the cold. The architects, in their quest for a perfect world, had forgotten the most fundamental rule of all. What makes us human isn't the absence of struggle, but the way we rise to meet it. The story doesn't end in chaos. It ends with Leo, the young historian, standing before a new monument in the heart of what was once Washington, D.C., but it's not a towering statue of Elias Vance, the billionaire genius. It's a life-size hologram, a flickering image of a memory, pulled from the grid itself. It shows Elias Vance as a young boy, shivering in a brutal winter snowstorm from a forgotten time. He's poor, he's hungry, and he's holding a single, small apple. And in this hologram, he breaks the apple in two, and shares half with a stray dog shivering beside him. Below this moving image, an inscription glows softly. It's the final lesson, the core principle of the Vance grid, and the enduring ray of hope for humanity. It reads, "The greatest power we ever generated wasn't electricity. It was the warmth we gave each other when the world was cold." The world had been given a second chance, not by a machine, but by a memory. A reminder that our weaknesses, our compassion, our ability to feel for one another, were never bugs to be fixed. What if I told you the story you think you know is a lie? Not a malicious lie, but a beautiful, century-long misunderstanding. For nearly 100 years, we've celebrated the legend of Elias Vance, the boy genius from Ohio who cured the world's most devastating diseases. We vetoed the story of the miraculous $50,000 check that appeared just when his research was about to collapse. We attributed it to a guilt-ridden judge, a far-sighted wealthy investor, a mysterious philanthropist. The details changed with every telling, but the core idea remained. One rich person saw potential and saved the day. That was the story we told our children, a story of individual brilliance and singular generosity. But the truth, as it so often does, was buried, waiting patiently under the floorboards. The year is 2085. The world has changed in ways Elias could only dream of, all thanks to his work. To honor his legacy, humanity decided to build a monument, right where it all began. His old laboratory, a humble basement in a forgotten Ohio neighborhood, was scheduled for demolition. It was during this final clearing that a construction drone pinged an anomaly. Under the dusty floorboards, hidden in a small lead-lined box designed to protect its contents from time itself, was the truth. It wasn't a stock certificate or a deed. It was a list. A simple handwritten list of names. 342 of them, to be exact. As historians and data analysts scrambled to cross-reference the names, a startling picture began to emerge. These weren't the names of billionaires, politicians, or captains of industry. The names on this list belonged to people who barely existed in the official records of wealth and power. They were the names of the janitors who cleaned the offices of the rich after dark. The waitresses at the diner where Elias's mother, Sarah, worked double shifts, her feet aching but her smile never faltering. They were the bus drivers who navigated the city streets before dawn, the street vendors who sold hot dogs in the rain, the seamstresses who stitched clothes for a pittance. The suspense that had fueled a century of speculation was over. The great anonymous investor wasn't a person, it was a people. It was a collective of the forgotten, the overlooked, the working poor of Elias Vance's own neighborhood. Can you imagine the shockwave that sent through society? The realization was so profound, so utterly heart-touching, that it stopped the world in its tracks. For 5 long years, these 342 souls had pooled their nickels, their dimes, and their crumpled single-dollar bills. Every spare coin that could have bought a moment's comfort, every dollar saved by skipping a meal, went into a secret fund. They did this for the studying boy, the quiet kid they saw hunched over books under the dim light of his basement window. Elias Vance wasn't saved by a wealthy benefactor. He was a project of the people, by the people, and for the people. Let's travel back in time. Imagine a cold, biting winter in 1989. The scene is a dimly lit church basement, the air thick with the smell of damp wool and cheap coffee. Here, those 342 people gathered after their long, grueling shifts. Their hands were calloused from labor, their clothes were worn thin, their faces etched with the fatigue of a life lived on the margins. But their eyes held a fire. One by one, they walked to the front of the room and dropped their meager savings into a tattered felt hat being passed around. A whisper would travel through the small crowd, for the boy, for Sarah's boy. He's our chance. There was no talk of getting rich, no discussion of fame or return on investment. They spoke of one thing, a ray of hope. Why did they do it? Because they saw in Elias a reflection of their own deferred dreams. Each of them had a spark, a talent, a potential that had been crushed by the sheer weight of a world that demanded they just survive. The woman who wanted to be a nurse instead packed boxers in a factory. The man with a gift for mechanics spent his days washing dishes. In Elias, they saw a chance for one of their own to break free, to soar. His success wouldn't be just his own. It would be a victory for all of them, a testament that their lives, their struggles, had meaning beyond the daily grind. He was their collective dream, given flesh and blood and a brilliant mind. The karma, the beautiful, poetic justice of this story, is almost too perfect to believe. Elias Vance dedicated his entire life, his entire fortune, to creating a global health and support grid for the poor and disenfranchised. He built systems to ensure that no one would be denied a chance at life because of their background. He did all this, never once knowing that he himself was the ultimate product of that very principle. He was literally built by the poor he sought to save. The money he used to create his first life-saving formulas came from the very people he was trying to help. He was the answer to a prayer that he never knew was whispered. When this truth was revealed in 2085, it didn't just add a new chapter to Elias Vance's biography. It ripped the old book to shreds and forced us to write a new one for all of humanity. The myth of the self-made man, the rugged individualist, pulling himself up by his own bootstraps, was exposed for the hollow fiction it always was. It was replaced by a more powerful, more honest narrative. The community-made hero. The revelation hit the modern world with the force of a tidal wave. It forced a global reckoning with our most basic assumptions about wealth, success, and responsibility. We began to understand that wealth isn't just a private possession to be hoarded. It is a public trust, a resource to be circulated for the collective good. The saga of Elias Vance concludes not in a grave, not in a cold stone monument, but in the living, beating heart of every person who has ever felt that the world was too big, too cruel, too unfair. His life became a symbol not of what one person can achieve, but of what we can achieve together. The world can be a cruel place. We see cruel behavior, selfishness, and indifference every day. They can define the darkness of the night. But the story of Elias and his 342 secret investors proves that a collective ray of hope will always, always bring the dawn. As we reach the end of this incredible journey, I want you to hold on to that image of the church basement. Remember the faces of those 342 people who gave what little they had to a boy they barely knew, all for a shared dream. They didn't know they were changing history. They just believed in a neighbor. They believed in a better future. The next Elias Vance is out there right now. Maybe they're studying under a street lamp near you. Maybe they're working a dead-end job. Their true potential hidden from the world. Or maybe, just maybe, they are you. And the next community of 342 silent heroes, well, that could be us. Thank you for joining me on this incredible story. If it moved you, please consider sharing it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that change the way we see the world. Have you ever wondered if a single act of kindness, no matter how small, could change the world? What if I told you that a few spare dollars, dropped into a hat in a dusty basement, could one day cure diseases and reshape an entire nation? This isn't a fairy tale. This is the incredible, untold story of Elias Vance and the secret that lay dormant for a century. Our story begins not with a bang, but with a whisper, in the freezing cold of an Ohio winter. Imagine a young boy, Elias, so hungry he's counting his own ribs. He's an orphan, invisible to the world, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a fire in his belly, a fire fueled by desperation. He watches the world from the outside, seeing people struggle, seeing dreams die in the frost. But in that crushing poverty, an idea takes root. What if the small forgotten bits of money from people just like him could be pooled together? What if their collective spare change could become a force for good? One night, in the dimly lit basement of a community hall, Elias stands before a small crowd. These aren't wealthy investors, they're janitors, factory workers, and cleaning ladies. They are the tired, the poor, the huddled masses of their time. He speaks not of riches, but of hope. He asks them to believe in a future they might not see, to contribute whatever they can spare. $1, 50 cents, a handful of coins. In a moment of incredible trust and shared desperation, 342 people empty their pockets. The total sum, a meager $312. To the world, it was nothing. But to Elias, it was everything. It was the seed of a revolution. With that tiny sum, Elias Vance, the starving orphan, began a journey that would make him a legend. He wasn't just smart, he was a visionary. He saw patterns in the market that no one else did, using early forms of data analysis to turn that small pile of cash into a small fortune, then a larger one, and then an empire. He became a titan of technology and finance, a name whispered in the halls of power. But Elias never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the faces in that basement, the people who gave him their last dollar. While the world saw him as a reclusive genius, Elias was working on his secret, lifelong project. He called it the Legacy Trust. Using advanced AI and genealogical tracking, he meticulously traced the bloodlines of every single one of those original 342 donors. He followed their families through generations, through triumphs and tragedies, all while the fund he started grew silently, exponentially, like a ghost in the machine of the global economy. Economists would later speculate about this mysterious ghost fund, a massive, untraceable accumulation of wealth that seemed to defy all logic. They had no idea it was the heartbeat of Elias Vance's promise. Now, fast forward exactly 100 years. The year is 2100. The New York Stock Exchange is buzzing with an energy not seen in decades. The world is holding its breath. Today, a timed-release digital vault, a relic from the legendary Elias Vance, is set to open. What's inside? Gold, digital currency, the keys to a financial kingdom. The tension is electric as the countdown timer hits 0. The vault unlocks, and the world is stunned. It's not a personal fortune. It's the Legacy Trust. The $312 from that Ohio basement has multiplied a millionfold, becoming the largest philanthropic fund in human history. But this isn't free money. Elias left one crucial condition. The immense wealth could only be accessed by the descendants of the original donors if they were actively working on a project that served the common good. It was the ultimate karma. The spare change of the poor had become the primary capital for the world's future leaders, innovators, and healers. This act gave birth to a new economic model, circular philanthropy. It wasn't about handouts, it was about investing in human potential, especially among the marginalized. The data was astonishing. For every single dollar invested by the Vance Trust, the social return was $100. Crime rates plummeted. Public health skyrocketed. Innovation flourished in places that had been forgotten for generations. The boring history of numbers and statistics became the beautiful story of a new American renaissance. All powered by a promise made in a cold basement a century ago. Let's travel 10 years further, to the year 2110. We're in Detroit, in a gleaming, high-tech laboratory built in a neighborhood that was once a symbol of urban decay. A brilliant young scientist is making the final adjustments on her research. She is a descendant of one of the original 342, a cleaning lady who had given her last $5 to a starving boy with a crazy idea. Today, that young scientist has just found the cure for a disease that has plagued humanity for centuries. She leans back, exhausted but triumphant. On her desk sits a small holographic portrait of Elias Vance. She looks at his image, the boy who became a titan, the man who never forgot. A single tear rolls down her cheek as she whispers, "We did it, Elias, we did it." In that moment, the single ray of hope that was sparked in a snowy basement in Ohio had finally reached the furthest corners of the universe. The story of Elias Vance is more than just a saga of wealth and power. It's a powerful testament to a simple truth. No act of kindness, no matter how small, is ever wasted. It shows us that our deepest scars, the struggles that define us, can become the very blueprints for our greatest strengths. It's a reminder that the true American dream isn't about what you can accumulate for yourself, but about what you can give back to others. It's about planting a tree whose shade you know you may never sit in. So the next time you feel small, or think your contribution doesn't matter, remember Elias Vance. Remember the 342 souls in that basement. Your single act of kindness could be the seed of a future you can't even imagine. They say the American dream is a paved road, but for some, it's a path of broken glass and frozen Midwestern nights. Tonight, we're going to unravel a story so profound, it will make you question everything you thought you knew about success, sacrifice, and the silent battles fought in the shadows of history. Imagine a young boy standing in the middle of a blizzard, in a dying Ohio town. He's wearing a summer jacket that's twice his size, and the hunger in his belly feels like a physical weight. This boy's name is Elias Vance. Decades later, that same name would be synonymous with a global tech empire, a man who revolutionized the energy sector and lifted millions out of poverty. But the world never knew the truth. The world never knew that the most successful man in America was carrying a secret so deep, it would rewrite the very meaning of sacrifice. This isn't just a story about wealth. It's a chronicle of blood, sweat, and a mother's silent roar against a cruel world. Elias Vance grew up in the shadow of rusting factories, where smoke blotted out the sun and hope was a luxury no one could afford. His childhood was a series of closed doors and cold stares. While other kids played, Elias and his mother, Elena, were trapped in a constant state of survival. Elena worked double shifts at a grease-licked diner, her hands raw and cracked from lion labor, just to afford a one-bedroom apartment with no heat. The cruelty of their environment reached its peak on a freezing Tuesday night. Their landlord, a man who owned half the town, threw their meager belongings onto the snow-covered sidewalk. They were $50 short on rent. Elias stood there, shivering, watching his mother beg for just one more night, just a little more time. In that moment, watching his mother's dignity being stripped away, his innocence died. A realization hit him like the bitter Ohio wind. In this world, if you are invisible, you are disposable. Now this is where the history books, the biographies, and the news reports all lied. The official story is one of a young genius pulling himself up by his bootstraps. The truth is far more heartbreaking. In the brutal winter of 1991, the struggle became too much. The real Elias Vance, weakened by malnutrition and a severe respiratory infection, passed away in his mother's arms in the frozen basement they were squatting in. The world didn't notice. The death of a poor boy in a forgotten town didn't make the headlines. But his mother Elena refused to let his name vanish into the silence of poverty. In an act of unthinkable grief and supernatural resolve, Elena made a choice that would defy reality itself. She buried her son in a secret corner of her heart and decided to take on his identity. She cut her hair short, bound her chest, lowered her voice, and transformed herself into Elias. She vowed that the name Elias Vance would never again be synonymous with weakness or suffering. For the next 30 years, Elena lived as a man. She was fueled by a mother's unquenchable rage and a martyr's endless love. As Elias, she navigated the hypermasculine world of 90s tech. She worked 3 jobs during the day while teaching herself to code by candlelight at night. She entered the cutthroat corridors of Silicon Valley, facing down corporate vultures who sneered at his humble beginnings and rough around the edges demeanor. But Elena had a superpower they could never understand. She had already lost everything. She had nothing left to fear. She built Vance Tech from the ground up, one grueling day at a time. Her driving force wasn't profit or fame. It was the memory of her son shivering in the cold. She developed a revolutionary sustainable energy AI, a system that could power entire cities for a fraction of the current cost. The struggle was constant and terrifying. The fear of being discovered, the profound isolation of living a lie, the physical and emotional toll of pretending to be someone else, day in and day out, for decades. Yet, she persevered. She became a billionaire, not for the yachts or the mansions, but to ensure that no mother would ever again have to watch her child freeze to death because they were $50 short on rent. She was building the world her son deserved to see. Of course, such monumental success doesn't go unnoticed, and it certainly attracts predators. Julian, the ruthless coup of Vance Tech, saw Elias as a puzzle. He couldn't understand why the CEO was so obsessed with the empathy algorithm, a program designed to distribute energy to the poorest communities first. He saw this not as philanthropy, but as weakness. Believing Elias had grown soft, Julian orchestrated a hostile takeover, a betrayal calculated to dismantle the compassionate core of the company. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. He underestimated the resilience of a woman who had already survived the death of her entire world. Elena, as Elias, didn't fight back with lawsuits or corporate warfare. She fought back with pure innovation. On the day of the takeover, she released a new, decentralized energy grid to the public, open source. It made Vance Tech's old patents, the very assets Julian was seizing, completely obsolete overnight. Julian's greed became his own karma. His new empire crumbled before it was even built, while the world looked to Elias not just as a genius, but as a savior. By the year 2025, the Vance Foundation had effectively eliminated energy poverty across the entire Rust Belt. It brought light and warmth to the very streets where Elena once begged for mercy, a full-circle moment of cosmic justice. The quiet, humble Elias Vance was hailed as a global hero. When Elias Vance finally passed away at the age of 75, the world mourned a titan, but he left behind one final instruction. He had a protege, a brilliant young engineer named Sarah, to whom he left a single, old-fashioned key. His final words to her were a request: go to the attic of that old, dilapidated house in Ohio. Sarah, confused but loyal, made the journey. She found the house, unlocked the attic door, and stepped into a room frozen in time. She didn't find stock certificates, or gold bars, or corporate secrets. She found a small, dusty box. Inside was a yellowed photograph of a beautiful little boy with a bright smile, and a leather-bound diary. Sarah opened it. The ink was faded, the handwriting elegant but strained. The final entry read, "My son Elias died 40 years ago today. I have lived his life so he wouldn't have to stay dead. I became the man he could have been, to build the world he deserved to see." Sarah stood in the dust-mote light, paralyzed, the diary trembling in her hands. The realization hit her with the force of a tidal wave. The man the world worshipped, the titan of industry, the symbol of the American dream, was never a man at all. He was a mother who had sacrificed her identity, her gender, her entire soul, to keep a promise to a ghost. The world celebrated the billionaire, Elias Vance, but the universe, in that dusty attic, bowed to the mother. Elena, this boring history of corporate success was, in reality, the greatest love story never told. It proved that the most powerful technology ever created isn't a microchip or an algorithm. It's a mother's love. Elena Vance showed us that true success isn't about how high you climb. It's about how much of yourself you are willing to burn to keep others warm. As the screen of history fades to black, we are left with a final, haunting image. That small boy in the snow, no longer shivering, finally at peace, because his mother didn't just move mountains for him. She changed the entire world in his name. Thank you so much for watching. If this story moved you, please consider sharing it. It's a reminder that behind every great success, there's often a story of sacrifice. We may never know. Don T. Forget to like and subscribe for more stories that challenge the way we see the world. We'll see you next time.